Welcome to another virtual author event at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I am John Charles, and today the Poison Pen is delighted to have with us an outstanding array of authors who are here to share their favorite spooky reads for the holiday season. Before we begin, the Poison Pen does have copies of all of the books we're talking about today, and if you'd like one or more, please give us a call or go online to the Poison Pen, and we'll be happy to connect you with these truly fabulously entertaining reads. Now I would like to welcome our group, Lindy Ryan, W.R. Gorman, Mina Hardy, and J.H. Markert.
Welcome, everyone.
Thank you for
Hello.
joining.
Hello.
Hello.
My first question for all of you is, authors have a life before they become published. So what can you tell us about each of you before you became a published author? We'll start with you, Wendy.
Well, my life before being a published author and after being one have a lot of similarities because I still have a day job as a Spanish teacher. So I think my day job is a lot more bubbly than the work I'm putting out there, but you know, that's just one of those things sometimes.
Lindy, what about you?
Well, like Wendy, I'm a teacher. I'm a professor at Rutgers. So I don't teach, I get to teach graduate students. So a little bit of a different population group, not nearly as bubbly. But I in the classroom pretty much all the time.
Megan, or should we call you Mindy?
So you can call me Mina or Megan. I answer to both. Um, my life before I became a published author, did I have a life before I became a published author? It was so long ago. I can't remember. I guess my life before becoming a published author was waiting or hoping or working toward becoming published. That was pretty much what it always felt like I wanted to do.
James, I know you had a different career before you began writing.
Yes, I was a tennis pro for 26 years.
Wow.
And then I hung up the rackets about 3, 4, right around COVID.
Hmm.
And then currently writing full time, of course, with the help of the breadwinning wife.
Okay. My next question for you is, when did you know that you wanted to be a writer? What was your path towards initially being published like? And why don't we start with you, James?
I have a little bit of a different path there. I always hated to read, all the way through, almost through high school. I hated it. And then it was my junior year, and my English teacher, I think we read Catcher in the Rye at the beginning of the year. And then he said, all right, enough with the classics. We're going to read Stephen King the rest of the year. And that's what I did. And I went from hating to read to absolutely loving it, just like that. And it was, overnight. And I don't think there's been a day since where I haven't read at least a little bit. And then around college, I decided, I have a little bit of creativity and I write fairly well. I'm going to give this a shot. And then 10 years of unpublished novels before I sold my first one in 2012.
Megan, what about you? What was your first book like?
Um, well, when I say that I have been writing as long as I can remember, that is true. I started writing in elementary school, writing stories. And when I was about 12, I figured out that people do this for a living, and that's what I wanted to do. So I started writing short stories and writing short stories for magazines. And then I started to concentrate on writing novels. And my first novel was published in 2002. So my path to get to where I am today has been long and winding and been through a lot. And how I got here was I kept writing and writing and writing until finally somebody published something. Somebody wanted to buy it.
Perseverance wins in the end.
Yeah, yes. And luck and maybe talent, maybe,
And
hopefully.
talent. Lindy, what about you?
I know I think I relate to Mina here. I don't was never without a pile of books. I was the first kid in line for the scholastic book fairs and gobbling up all the goosebumps and whatever. So I've been writing for as long as I can remember. But as an academic, my path to writing professionally started in nonfiction and academia. So I've done 3 textbooks, and arguably a lot less interesting than fiction, I think. And then I, wrote my debut novel and have been editing anthologies for a number of years, and things just, I think I magically fell into place for me, which I'm very grateful for. But loving moving outside of academic writing, that's for sure.
Lindy?
Yeah, I also have wanted to be a writer since I think I figured out that someone was actually writing the books that I was reading. Um, my debut came out like 3 months ago, so very recently. It took, a lot of years of writing and not publishing things. So, my first book and my debut novel are not the same book, which I think is pretty normal. But yeah, I mean, a lot of years of writing and reading and then saying, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. And then coming back to it because I just couldn't stay away from making my own words.
Let's talk a little bit about the book that brought you, or the work that brought you to us today, your current project. Lindy, yours is an anthology. What can you tell us about The Darkest Night?
Well, The Darkest Night is an anthology of spooky winter tales in the tradition of Christmas ghost stories, featuring 22 stories from some of today's, most recognizable names in horror. We also have some art and some poetry in there, from some incredibly talented folks. So every story in the collection or in the anthology surrounds like those dark, gloomy, cold days of winter, exploring, ghosts and specters and monsters and murder, all the good stuff for the holidays.
Now, most of us would associate the holiday Halloween most closely with horror, but actually there's a tradition of Christmas and the holiday season and spooky stories. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. The tradition of telling ghost stories at Christmas or during the winter holiday predates, even our Halloween kind of ghost stories. And, we can rely on things like Charles Dickens's Christmas Carol or Washington Irving's Christmas stories that kind of set some of those traditions. I mean, it is largely a European tradition that we haven't embraced so much in American culture, but I think the tides of the winter spooks are changing, and harkening back to some of those old storytelling, festivals that we would experience at the end of the year while we're shut inside trying to stay warm.
James, what can you tell us about your new book, Sleep Tight?
It's a book that I'd been working on for a while. And it's the 2 before it were more horror. I think this one is more along the lines of thriller, suspense, dark psychological thriller with a little horror elements in it. And it's done really well. I wrote it fairly quickly, and as it's inspired by growing up in the 80s by the multiple personality craze, after Billy Milligan and all that. And now, of course, it's called dissociative identity disorder. But I always wanted to write a story with a character that has multiple personalities. And this was my attempt at doing so.
Megan, what would you like us to know about Bitter is the Heart?
Bitter is the Heart. Bitter is the Heart was a book that I wrote simply because it was exactly the kind of book that I was looking to read and I wasn't finding. I really wanted to read a possession story that was not based on the tropes that we all think of. I need a young priest and an old priest and The Exorcist, and holy water and all of that. I really wanted to take a look at what it would be like to explore a possession story that was not based on Catholic exorcism rituals, the ones that we all seem to know or are familiar with. And also, it's really a book about how difficult it is when someone who was supposed to take care of you did not, and how that affects you as you grow older. And what is the real horror? Is the horror that there may or may not be something supernatural in your house, or is the horror that you can't actually blame your childhood trauma on a ghost or a demon, but just somebody who failed you. So that's where I came at it from. And like I said, it was just, it was, I didn't have a contract for the book when I wrote it. I just wrote it because it was a story that, it was exactly the kind of story that I wanted to read. And that's why I wrote it.
Mindy, that beginning of that book still creeps me out. So well done.
Thank you.
Wendy,
Me too. It's the only book I've ever written that made me sick to my stomach.
Wendy, what about We Kept Her in the Cellar? What do readers need to know?
Yeah, so We Kept Her in the Cellar is a horror fairy tale retelling. And I know it might sound like those words don't really go together, but I think horror and fairy tales have a lot in common, such as in horror, bad things often happen to women, and in fairy tales, bad things often happen to women. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that and just sort of imagining like what would the rationale be for Cinderella's stepfamily treating her in such a horrible way? And I was like, well, what if she's this terrifying monster who like has to be kept locked in the cellar. And so the idea just kind of spiraled from there. Cinderella is an eldritch monster, and her stepsister, Eunice, has to navigate the events of Cinderella, but replace Cinderella with this horrible, monstrous creature.
I thought it was fascinating because you flip the script on the fairy tale. It's told from the viewpoint of someone we often think of as the villain rather than the hero.
I love villainous retellings, so that was definitely writing what I like to read as well.
Megan, this is not the first time you've written a book with the theme of mother-daughter relationships. What is it about this particular family dynamic that fascinates you?
I don't know. I don't know why I always write about terrible mothers and terrible daughter relationships. I am a daughter. I have daughters. I like to think that is so sometimes I think the things that scare us the most are not things that we actually have experienced, but what we fear experiencing. So the destruction of a mother-daughter relationship to me, or a mother-daughter relationship to me that doesn't work or is harmful rather than loving. I guess something about that horrifies me. It's because I keep exploring it over and over again in so many of my stories, parent-child dynamics that just don't work the way that we want them to. And I guess that's it's probably because it's something that I find really horrifying and scary, and I don't want that. I don't want that in my life, so I write about it to get that out. Write about the things that sort of that's my exorcism, writing something that I don't want to have happen so that maybe it won't happen.
That's great. James, in Sleep Tight, you kind of deal with the serial killer idea. Why do you think serial killers are so fascinating to readers?
Um, I don't know. I think it's because historically you look back and all these true crime is everywhere now, and you can get true crime podcasts or documentaries on any serial killer from the history of last 200 years or so. And I think it's because they come off as so like they have a lot of them seem like they have a normal life to other people. And it's what's hidden on the inside. And they're, a lot of them are loners, but it's amazing how many of them do have families and they have this separate life almost. It really is to me almost like a Jekyll and Hyde type of thing, which is a concept and story I've always been fascinated with. So I mean that's my draw towards them, and that has always fascinated me since I was probably a teenager, just learning of that people like that existed. And part of the reason I like writing about them is to try to understand the why it all comes about and why it happens and how they turn into the monsters they are, or nature, nurture, all that stuff.
It's interesting. Lindy, you've edited a number of anthologies. What do you think is the most important thing when it comes to creating a compelling anthology? What is the key element you think is necessary?
Oh goodness, there's so many of those in an anthology, but I think, bringing the right group of authors together is critical in an anthology because you want voices and styles that are going to complement and uplift each other and not fight with each other on the page. So I think there's a lot of curation inside an anthology with with the writing and the voices and the people in addition to the actual story or the themes or the topics. So it's really very careful and intentional everywhere from, just the beginning scope of what the anthology should be to who is invited or who is, accepted into the anthology, that making sure that those voices can play well together inside one book or one project, even though, your stories are going to be different or your approaches are going to be different. You want everybody to complement and lift each other up, like I said. So, yeah, I think that's one of the most challenging parts of putting together an anthology, because after that we're dealing with words and stories, and we all know how to handle those. It's the audience part and the getting everyone to work together part. I think that is the biggest challenge in the anthology space.
In addition to editing The Darkest Night, you also contributed a story. What can you tell us about your contribution?
I did. My story was co-authored by Christopher Brooks, and it's kind of plays to some of Chris's and I favorite topics, which is grief horror, and especially at the holidays when we are missing loved ones, or maybe not so loved ones, but we still feel the absence of the people who are no longer with us. And that story really, I was thinking about the exorcism conversation we were just having, and there's an amount of, personal exorcism that happens, right? When we exercise grief or we exercise trauma out of ourselves. And that's really what the protagonist in that story experiences, visiting his mother's grave at Christmas.
Was it hard to edit yourself?
It's always hard to edit myself. I'm not a great short form writer. I mean, I'm a novelist by trade and an academic, right? And that doesn't pair well for short form writing. But luckily my co-author, Chris, is fantastic. So we provide a good balance for each other when one of us wants to, run wild and loose with some story.
Readers new to the horror genre might be surprised that it's actually not monolithic. There's a lot of different flavors within this genre. How would you describe your particular brand of horror suspense? And I'll throw it open to whoever wants to start. Or I'll call on one of you.
I can start.
Okay.
The Nightmare Man came out 2 years ago. And when I wrote it, I didn't even intend to write what turned out to be a horror novel. The 6 books that I'd published previously were all historical fiction, and I switched over and rebranded, and I thought I'd written a kind of a crime detective with supernatural, and it got thrown into the horror genre, which I think it can be, but I also get a lot of people who say, well, that's not horror. And I'm like, well, I don't really know what it is. I just wrote it. So I get in trouble a little bit because I write whatever story comes to me. And Mr. Lullaby, the one before Sleep Tight, is definitely more horror. I am getting a lot of Sleep Tight. That's not horror. I liked it, but it's not horror. So I don't know exactly what I write other than it's kind of dark, and hopefully thrilling and suspenseful. And I didn't know there were that many different subgenres to horror until I wrote The Nightmare Man and started to step my foot into the vast pool.
Anyone else?
Sure, I'll jump in. Sorry, Mina. I think, horror is a huge conversation, and people are very quick to say what is and what is not horror. But it's a, gigantic umbrella with many subgenres, and it's very personal. I think horror is a very personal experience. I think my writing tends to fall into this really interesting middle ground of cozy horror. My stuff is very pink, very female driven horror, but definitely with a lot of heart. And with humor. I love comedy horror. My favorite genre is when bizarre, horrible things are happening, but we look at them through the light rose-colored lens of it could be worse. Yeah. So I really like the cozy. I like to get a laugh amongst my bloodshed. So yeah, I think the cozy space, and to me, it's a comfortable, warm space to be in. We get to challenge some fears, confront some demons, maybe some monsters, whatever, and live to tell the tale and be happy when we're at the end of the story. So that's my approach.
I was actually thinking about this a while ago because I write in many genres, and I got my start in publishing, writing romance and women's fiction. So very, very emotion and character and relationship driven. In romance, the story is all about the relationship really, and that happy ever after. So I was thinking that I don't write happy ever after horror. I do write optimistic horror. Anything that I can think of that I've written that I would think of as horror tends to, you get through the bad and then there is a resolution, and everybody is generally at least okay in the end, or they have had some epiphany or something has changed and there's some hope there. Even if things are still pretty much terrible, there's hope. And that's what I was thinking about previously about, well, what kind of what ties my horror together. And I really think that across all the genres that I write, even though they're different genres and different subjects, that is what comes out in anything that I'm writing is relationships and connections between people. And even if something supernatural is happening or something bad is happening or scary, my stories focus on how those people are relating to each other in them. And something is coming at them or something bad is happening to them and they're dealing with that, but it's how they're feeling about it. It's not necessarily just how they're reacting to it, but it's a lot of emotion and relationships. So maybe relationship horror. Maybe that's what I do.
That's good.
I mean,
Wendy?
what's more horrifying than relationships?
Yeah, so I only have one novel published, but my agent actually asked me this question when I signed with her because she wanted to get a sense of, what I was as a writer. And so I said that, like, my personal style, whether that's in horror or science fiction and fantasy, is dark and gross and very voicey. I usually have a very strong sense of what my main character sounds like in a very particular way I want them to talk. I love gore. I love diving into some of the grosser aspects of, like, say, the original Cinderella tale. And I just think that there's something so cathartic about diving into these darker stories and both reading them and writing them. So dark, gross, and voicey are kind of my three
Keywords.
things, I would say. Yeah,
Yeah, the original Cinderella story, they cut off her toes or something like that, I think, to
they sure do.
into those shoes. It's pretty dark. Different brands of fiction, different genres of fiction come and go into favor. We've seen that over the last century. For a while, horror was out of favor, but now it's having a renaissance. Why do you think people are rediscovering horror? What is it about this that at this moment in time is making such a strong connection with readers?
I think that horror is a way for people to be scared in a safe way. You can go into a book that is really scary or step into a movie theater or put on a scary movie and, like, feel all these feelings that maybe you are feeling in your real life, but you don't have an opportunity to, like, express, and you're allowed to express them in a safe way. And you can also put it down and turn it off and step away from the horror. And I mean, it's silly to say, like, the enjoyable thing about horror is that you can leave it behind, but you can. Like, you can put down the scary book having read it and be, like, done with it in a way that, like, with uncertainty in our real world, we can't turn it off. We can't step away. And I think there's something really appealing and cathartic about being able to be done with it and feel those feelings and then say, okay, bye. I'm going to go read something really fluffy now, or I'm going to go pet my cat, or, whatever you want to do next.
You
I
want
wrote a.
wonder if it has some.
Oh, God, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that I wonder if it has something to do with maybe James, like you said, since when you were a teenager and you were really into horror at the time, and so was I, and we grew up. I didn't grow up reading Goosebumps, but I grew up reading Stephen King, and I was there for the heyday of the 80s horror. And so, maybe there's this nostalgia and like all the people who fell in love with it when they were young and were super influenced by all those scary things, now grew up and are writing their own stories and or looking for that. So think of all the like Stranger Things went back to the 80s, and that was, hugely popular with people who didn't live in the 80s, but bringing that back. So I wonder if there's a nostalgic connection to it as well, where those who grew up with that and it affected them, and now we're infecting everybody else too.
like a zombie plague or something like that?
Yes.
Well, I wrote an article for Crime Reads magazine on that exact question, and that's basically was what the article was about. The just my generation, in the growing up in the 80s, and you had Stephen King and Dean Koontz and Clive Barker and Peter Straub, and I think now where all the early readers from back then were inspired and now kicking out their own stuff. It's almost like they created an army back then, and and it's all coming out now. At least that's my take on it.
Yeah, and I guess I want to agree with, with everyone. I think I'd rather pick up a horror novel than watch the news any day of the week right about now. And certainly there's an element of nostalgia coming back. I mean, I love like the throwback 80s and 90s style of horror, but horror is also finally becoming more diverse and inclusive. So we're getting stories from people who've never told their stories before. And including women. I mean, horror is a women's genre, right? Our lives are filled with horror every day, from our circumstances to the body horror of being female. So I think we're coming to a place where we're looking for confidence in our horror when the world around us is so frightening. We're looking to throw back to the nostalgia of simpler, different days, and we're being more open and more accessible to voices in horror that we just simply haven't heard before, especially in kind of like the larger publishing level. So I think all of these things are working together and providing this incredible renaissance of this very big, very dynamic horror genre. Where everyone can find something they love, something that's to their taste, something that speaks to them, which is the beauty of horror.
It's a wonderful insight. I think you're right too. We sometimes forget that women really have played a pivotal role in horror, going back to Mary Shelley and Anne Radcliffe.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit now about your writing process, because that can differ from author to author. I'm also interested if it differs from book to book or project to project. And why don't we start with you, Lindy, because you edit, but you also write.
Yes. And I think every book, every process is very different. In fact, at exactly midnight this morning, I finished revisions on what will be my third novel. And that book has taken me the longest to write and has been the most challenging write. But I think, sometimes I like to write only at night. Sometimes I like to write only in silence. Sometimes I like to work just during the day. So I think, part of the author's kind of MO is to find the environment that fits the story, and then squeeze it for all it's worth as you get that blood onto the page. I think we always talk about writing being like squeezing blood from a stone sometimes. So the best thing to do is surround yourself with boulders and grab a chisel, because you got to be open to letting creativity flow. And for me, it looks very different every time. And when I'm editing, it's the same. I want to make sure that I am present and that I'm in that writer's story so that I'm doing it justice. And so that means the kind of same thing. If I'm reading something that's cold and spooky and dark, then I too would like to be cold and spooky and dark. I think I'm very method in my writing and editing, but so far it suits me well. My family might disagree with my strange nocturnal habits, but What are you going to do?
What about you, Wendy? This is just your first book, but are you working on something else?
No, always. I have a million projects going. I am a drafts on drafts on drafts kind of person. I get really, really jealous when I hear that people can just like write a draft and then like send it to someone, because when I write the end at the end of my first draft, the book is still a mess. And it's going to need me to go back through and make a ton of changes before I even feel like showing it to another human being. So for We Kept Her in the Cellar, I want to say when I sold it, I had done 7 drafts of it. And then we went through more with, the process of getting it edited and published. So 9 or 10 drafts is a lot, I think, for a single project, but that is just how I work. I have to do that many in order to like be happy with what I've written. So I'm a revise, revise, revise kind of person.
James, what about you?
A lot of it depends on if I have a deadline. Um, and I would definitely work better under a deadline. So if I have a book on contract and I know I need to get it done, that's good for me, because otherwise, I can be all over the place. Um, but I tend to write from about 8 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. And I kind of edit as I go. The first 50 to 100 pages usually takes a while, because I always liken it to like spread out cookie or dough, bread dough. You keep folding it out and making it bigger and bigger, and that's what I do to the first 50 pages. I'll edit the first 50 and get it to 75, and then I'll start back over at the beginning, because there's all kinds of threads that I didn't intend to be in there, or new threads that weren't there at the beginning. Uh, so by the time I'm finished writing a book, I will have gone through the first 100 pages, probably 10 times more than I did the second half, just because it doesn't all make sense in my mind until that point, because I'm definitely not a plotter. I don't outline. I've tried. I can't do it. I fly by the seat of my pants for sure. Um, the, probably the quickest turnaround, I had a book finished this summer, but my publisher wanted this idea that I had first. And that idea I just thought of. So, and I hadn't started the book. So I had 4 months to get it done, and I got it in last week. But usually I'd have to think of a book for months to a year before I start writing it. This one I had to just hit the ground running, and it was different experience.
Megan, what about your process? Am I wrong in thinking it involves music?
No, you are not wrong at all. I usually listen to music while I'm writing. Most books have their own playlist, which could be made up of songs that relate to the book or just whatever I happen to be listening to at the time. Long ago, when I first started writing, seriously writing, my children were small, so I wrote from like 9 until 3 in the morning. Like I wrote when I had time, and fortunately, I don't have to do that anymore. But I usually get up pretty early and write. And I actually just started. I started actually a job, with a full-time job, which is the first time I've ever had one. I've always written full-time, so now I have a job that's writing, but it's not writing my own books. So I'm still trying to figure out how to fit that in. So now I'm just getting up much earlier than I would like to. I used to stay up much later than I wanted to. Now I get up much earlier than I would like to. But over time, what has happened, I also wish that I could be a plotter, and I'm not. I'm also a multi-drafter, because I just write really fast and it's quite a mess. And so I have to go back and revise it as many times as necessary before I could ever show it to anybody. But now I write out of order. And I didn't used to do that. I didn't do that in the beginning. And now I write out of order. I just write the scenes that that feel most exciting, because sometimes that's the only way I'll do it, is if I feel super excited about it. I am the worst person to get advice from about writing, because I'm just like, meh. Sometimes I just don't. It's hard. It's hard to get the motivation to do it. It's hard to find that energy. So my writing process has changed a lot over the years, but like James, if I have a deadline, whether it's self-imposed or a contract, if I have a deadline, I am far more likely to get those words down.
Well, you also wrote something, Megan, about that I never really thought about from a reader's perspective, but for you, how important getting the right character name is.
Yeah, so it's really funny that you say that because I'm looking at revising the very first book I ever sold to a traditional publisher. And as I'm going through, I realized how many times I've used the same names in so many books, not for main characters, but for the side characters. And I'm like, what the heck? There's how many times did I use the name Dennis? Who's Dennis? I don't even know a Dennis. And I can think of at least 3 or 4 different books where there's a Dennis. Why? I don't know. So clearly in some way names aren't that important, I guess, if I choose the same ones over and over again. But yeah, I think choosing the right name for your main character, names give us, right or wrong, certain names give us an impression like right off the bat of like what kind of person you are. At the very least, it gives you an indication kind of what age the character is. Or maybe what ethnicity they are, or, you can learn so much about someone or guess so much about someone from their name. So I do spend time trying to figure out what name I think fits my characters the most. And I don't know about the rest of you, but have you ever named your character something and then maybe, at the end of the book when you think you're finished, you go back and you're like, that's not their name. I need to change that. And then
I've done it.
that's fun.
Yeah, all the time. I have this really weird quirk that I've noticed when I don't know what to name a character. I give them a name and I think it's a new and unique name. And then I realize it's another H name that rhymes with something. Like there's this weird kind of subconscious pattern. I'm like, I don't know what your name's going to be. It's going to be Heather or Hank or Hannibal. I don't know. It's always an H. Yeah, I have a problem. And D is another one. Everybody's got D, like Dennis. Regardless, I don't have a Dennis, but I have a couple Daniels running around. So yeah, I definitely, but when you get the right name, when you get the right name for your character, like you have this story. Or like this grasp on the story that you don't have until you get that name right, or at least I think so. So I totally agree with you that names are powerful writing totems.
My next question for each of you is you all have been writing now for a while. What have you learned? What writing wisdom have you gained that you wish someone had told you when you were first starting out as an author?
I would the as far as not putting a timeline on publishing and better defining what success is. I think I went for 10 years of rejection, and before I signed with my first agent. And I think not rushing a book to just to get it out there. That's one big one. And then for me, it was redefining. I think early on, I just wanted to have books all over the world, and all over Barnes and Noble and this and that. And then I think it had when you just step away for a while and you don't write, and then you realize how much you love it. And success could be just finishing a book. I think I didn't start having success until I redefined what it meant to me.
I'll jump in. So I think that the piece of advice that I would give that I wish I had known from the beginning is first, write for yourself, because if you're not writing something that you enjoy, it's going to be torture and nobody wants that. But also write for the people who like what you write, not for the ones who don't. you will not please everybody, and you can't please everybody, and you shouldn't try. So when you're writing your books, you're writing your book for the people who like what you write. The people who don't
Mhm.
like that, don't worry about it. You're going to get bad reviews. That's okay. We all do. Just keep writing the stories that you want to tell, because there are people out there who also want to read them. And that's who you're aiming for.
I think I would say you don't have to be Stephen King or, insert name of choice here, because I think there can be this sense of like, oh my gosh, I have to write like so and so, or I'm never going to be as good as these like writers that I look up to. But the space that we're like finding for ourselves in our stories is not because it's not because I'm Stephen King, it's because I'm writing my book that's like, has what I am putting into it. And so I think that when I was younger, especially, I was like, well, if I want to be successful, I'm going to have to do what these other people are doing. And I'm not saying I'm not influenced by, like, of course I'm influenced by these people, but I'm not them. And that's okay. That's actually a good thing. Like, that's what's going to make someone really enjoy my book where they might not have enjoyed the ones that influenced me to write it.
Yeah, I think mine is, a piece of advice we all know when we start writing, or we all innately know, and that's read. And it's, everyone says to be a good writer, you got to be a good reader. And we kind of shirk that advice a lot, I think, because we want to write our stories, not read someone else's. But read the stories that speak to you, the writers that speak to you, find inspiration. I mean, to me, it's very healing, especially when I'm fighting a story, or God, even worse, fighting a revision. um, you know Go read something else, read in your genre, read out, for the love of all of the books, read out of your genre. Just read, absorb, think about storytelling, think about voice, think about approaches, and that gives you a more, a broader palette from which to write for your readers and write within your voice. So
Wonderful. That kind of brings us to another pivot point. We've talked about you all as writers, but now let's switch and talk about you as readers. What is or what are the books that have scared you the most as a reader?
So I can start with a book that I read,
Yeah.
I want to say last year, that was just very deeply unsettling and disturbing. And I had to put it down at a couple points, which is not usually a reaction I have. And the book is Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Basterica, who is an Argentinian author. It's called Cadáver Exquisito in Spanish, but it's a translation. Um, I'm sorry, we're all horror writers, right? I can talk about gross things. It's about like factory farming cannibalism. And so it was deeply disturbing, but also I found it so beautifully written and so wonderfully translated. I started reading it in English. I got halfway through and I was like, wait a second, is this a translation? And it is. And so my goal is to now go back and read it in Spanish, but um, it's disgusting and it's awful. And at the same time, it's like very, very impactful. And I think the writing is written in such a way that you know, said I was going to read the first chapter. And then I looked up from my phone. I read on my phone. And an hour had gone by and I'd shirked the thing I said I was going to do. And I was totally lost in this book, even as it made me deeply and uniquely uncomfortable. So, recommendation, but make sure you have a strong stomach before going into it.
oh, I want to jump in next because I too was going to talk about that book. It's so brilliant and so horrifying, and it leaves you with this really disgusted taste in your mouth, and you're not sure if it's because of what you read or how much you enjoyed reading it. But it is uniquely horrifying. I was going to throw out Josh Mallerman's newest Incidents Around the House, and I have read all of Josh's work, and that book scared the actual snot out of me. About at 4% in per my Kindle, and that is very, very hard to do. So um, that's my contribution to the scariest books you've ever read talk. Definitely a little bit of light cannibalism, with Tender is the Flesh, and then move on to some haunted tale with incidents around the house.
a book that I can remember reading that really made me scared, like having to leave the lights on, was when I read it for the first time, which whenever it came out is when I read it. So I was much younger. As far as more recent reads, I had to look up because I'm I'm an author, but I'm terrible about remembering authors' names. That's horrible. But I wouldn't say that these two books scared me like boo, like jump scare, but they scared me as far as just being horrified. And the first one was the Laws of the Skies by Gregoire Courtois, which is it's so horrifying that as I was reading it, and it's very, very short, as I was reading it, and I was saying to my husband, oh my God, you have to read this. It's horrible. This is maybe the worst, one of the worst things I've ever read. And he was like, what? You want me to read it? But that's what we do to each other. And it just, I'll just say that it deals with children and child death. So it was horrifying, but I could not stop reading it, and I thought about it for days afterward. And then I recommended it to my husband and my son, and it's like, this is horrible, but you have to read it. And the other one that was a kind of a similar feeling was The Bunker Diary by Kevin Brooks, if anybody has read that. And it was just this increasing sense of dread. So it's a bunch of people and they're kept in a basement bunker, and there's just this growing sense of dread. And I kept reading chapter after chapter and thinking, yeah, this isn't going to end well, and I don't know if I want to. I want to find out what happens, but I don't know if I'm
Good.
ready to find out what happens. And then I got to the end of it, and I just like set my Kindle down, and I think I just stared into space for a minute or two, like feeling horribly disturbed. So I don't know if disturbed is the same as being scared, but I certainly felt terrible. But in the way that, you know, excuse me, why are we scaring ourselves? Why do we do that? I don't know. There's some kind of catharsis to it, or some kind of, well, at least my life isn't that bad, or something.
For me, it was definitely a book that had some scenes in it that stayed in my mind for long enough to affect my sleep. But there's one book, The Exorcist, that I've tried to read it 3 different times, and I've put it down all 3 times. And I think I'll try it again. And I don't know why. I mean, I've seen the movie plenty of times. I don't know. There's something about reading it that really, because possession is really one of the only things that scares me. And I get into that book, and then I'm like, all right, I'm done. I'll come back to it. But it's recently, and Lindy, I'm going to steal your example there with Josh Mallerman's Incidents Around the House. I haven't been scared by a book and probably since my teen years when I read it. But Incidents was just so unique the way it was written, and I won't give anything away, but there's a scene about a third of the way into that book. I had to put it down. But that scene scared me as much as the Exorcist.
For my next question, you can say as much or as little as you'd like, because I know authors are somewhat possessive about what they're working on, but what would you like us to know about what's coming next from you as an author? And we'll start with you, Wendy.
I'm actually working on, oh, sorry, did you say Wendy or Lindy?
Wendy, you go for it, girl.
Both of you.
Well, I was just going to say I'm actually working on a piece of science fiction right now rather than horror. I am not gone from horror. I will be back into this space, but my current project is about a group of space whales, and people live inside of them and they start to die. And my main character has to figure out why. It's gross, it's dark, it's got a voicey character. So I think it's still on brand, even if it's um, not in the same genre.
Lindy?
Did you say space whales?
Space whales,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm in. I'm sold. Done. Next up for me is the sequel to my debut novel that came out last year. This year, gosh, I'm done with 2024. Bless Your Heart was my debut that came out this past April. The sequel, Another Fine Mess, comes out in upcoming April, and sees the same group of Southern monster slayers tackle yet another adventure in their small town. And that's all I'll say for now.
Megan?
I am nibbling away at a few different projects. One is a thriller, one is a steamy women's fiction, and one is a horror. And the horror is the one that I have been working the hardest on. And it's based on a trip that my husband and I took to Wales, and a trip that my sister and my mom and I took to the resort where they filmed Dirty Dancing. And it takes place in Michigan, and it deals with water and creatures that live in water that are not mermaids. They are something more horrifying than that. And it's also a bad mother-daughter relationship. So yeah, I'm revisiting, I'm retreading that ground.
James, what about you?
I just this past week turned in my next thriller suspense that's coming out in September called Spider to the Fly. Although I think the name might end up being changed. But basically, there's a female character who is watching the news one day, and the 17th victim of the serial killer, they put her on the screen, and she sees that it looks exactly like her. And she's convinced that it's her twin. And she looks more into the situation, and I don't want to give a lot away, but there's a lot going. The twin theme is definitely woven throughout the book. And there's one called The Spider, and the other one's called The Fly.
Oh, that's clever. How can readers learn more about you and your books? What social media are you on? We'll start with you, James.
I am on Instagram. I was on Twitter a lot, but I'm not on there as much anymore. Over at Blue Sky Social, I'm brand new on there. I'm on Facebook. I do have a TikTok account, but I think I have like one follower. I've only been on there once. But mainly Instagram and Facebook, and starting off on Blue Sky Social.
Megan?
Well, you can find more about me at minahardy.com or meganhart.com, because I'm on Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, no longer on Twitter, on TikTok, Facebook, probably some other random social accounts that I can no longer remember. But if you go to either of my websites, that should have any social links, and readers can learn more about where to find me there.
Lindy?
I am on Instagram at Lindy Ryan Writes and at lindyryanwrites.com. Otherwise, I am fasting from social media as much as possible to preserve my mental health into the new year. So I keep up my monthly newsletter and post pictures of my dog and books. So that's about all I do.
Wendy?
Yeah, you can find my website at wrgormanwrites.com. Excuse me. Otherwise, I too keep a very low social media profile.
Well, I can't believe how quickly our time has gone by, but I do have one last question for Lindy because I love discovering new things, and I had no idea there was a Grimm Society. What can you tell us about that?
The Brothers Grimm Society of North America is a multi-university backed organization that is specifically focused on the works of Grimm. So for all of the fairy tale and folklore revisionists among us, we do a lot of it's a small and emerging society, and I am not in any official capacity with the group, but they are a lovely bunch of people studying fairy tales and folklores, particularly those by the Brothers Grimm, and telling the truth of those stories and going back to their beautifully dark, twisted roots, I suppose.
It's fascinating. Well, we've just been very fortunate at the Poison Pen to have with us a talented array of authors. James Markert, whose new book is Sleep Tight, Mina Hardy, whose new book is Bitter as the Heart, W.R. Gorman, We Kept Her in the Cellar is her debut, and Lindy Ryan with the anthology The Darkest Night. They all make wonderfully spooky reading for this holiday season. I'd like to thank our authors for joining us today, and thank you for tuning in to another virtual author event at the Poison Pen Bookstore.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, good luck to you.